What can the M4 Sherman teach us about financial planning? It's kind of a weird random question, isn't it? And on the surface, those two things don't seem like they would have anything in common. But in reality, they kind of do. So let's take a minute and dive into this, because this is the first of a new series where I'm trying to combine the two sides of my life. My passion and my past in the military as an Army officer and a current reserve officer, and also my passion for financial planning as I work with people to try to help them build meaningful wealth for the long term. So let's go over a little background information about what the M4 Sherman was and why it's relevant to financial planning. See, the M4 Sherman was the quintessential Allied tank during World War II. It was American designed and manufactured, and it was manufactured from February 1942 until July 1945. And during this time, the United States managed to crank out almost 50,000 Sherman tanks. And these were exported all over the world, not just equipping the United States Army and the United States Marine Corps, but also the British, the French. They were sent to the Soviets. They were sent to pretty much almost every Allied country to help them field armored divisions or armored formations on the battlefield. Now, the M4 Sherman gained kind of a bad reputation after the war as something that was poorly gunned and poorly armored and tended to just go up like a lighter when it was hit or penetrated by enemy fire. However, this reputation is not really warranted. It was a manifestation of a lot of myths and singular experiences that people had that kind of sullied the reputation of the effectiveness of the tank. In fact, the M4 Sherman was arguably the best tank of World War II when you factor in every single factor, hard and soft, that's important to a tank. You see, the M4 Sherman had pretty good firepower, pretty decent armor protection, and very good mobility on the battlefield. And all of that was continuously upgraded and adapted throughout the war to try to make the Sherman a better tank to be able to match up more to the situation on the ground, since it kind of evolved over time and was different from the way the Sherman was designed to operate initially. You see, the Sherman really had three primary responsibilities on the battlefield. It was designed to support the infantry in its attack to take ground and hold it. It was also designed to be an exploitation vehicle to exploit gaps in enemy lines whenever the military broke through the defensive lines of the enemy. And then finally, it was also meant to engage and destroy enemy tanks. Now, it did all three of these roles relatively well, but it didn't excel at any single one of them. It was a well-rounded tank that was reliable, easy to repair, and especially easy to manufacture to make sure that it was available in good quantity throughout all the combat theaters during World War II. Now, another thing about the Sherman was it was designed for the needs of the Army and the military of the United States. Could the United States have built a giant behemoth with the biggest, most powerful gun, impenetrable armor, and just a huge engine that could just rumble it through the ground to kind of get it to where it needs to be in a timely manner? Yeah, sure, the United States could have built something like that, but you got to keep in mind that everything that was built in factories in the United States had to be shipped either across the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean to reach the fronts where the tank was meant to fight. So it would have been impractical to make a giant behemoth that could outclass anything on the battlefield. The Sherman really was the right tool to be built for the right job. You see, when it comes to really the design of any piece of military equipment, there's hard factors and there's soft factors. Hard factors are things like, for a tank, armor protection values, the thickness of the armor, the angle of the armor plate, the size and power of the gun, how fast the tank can go over what type of terrain. Those are all things that are very easy to measure and things that people tend to focus on when evaluating something like a tank. The soft factors are things that are much more difficult to measure properly. These are things like, how cramped is the crew inside of the tank? Do they have plenty of room to move around, or are they crunched up in there like a sardine, which is going to really lower their morale and their combat effectiveness over time when they're operating the tank? Because if they're banging their head off the roof of the tank constantly, or when the tank's hit, they can't easily escape before the tank erupts in flames or explodes, that's going to have a pretty significant impact on the survivability of the crew and their effectiveness while they're fighting. Other things that are soft factors would be things like, how easy is it to be able to see out of the tank in order to identify targets and then engage them. Things like that are much harder to measure, but do conceivably have a significant impact on the effectiveness of the crew when they're operating the tank. And this is where the debate I mentioned earlier about the Sherman tank being, some people think it being crap and some people think it being very good, comes into play. Because the two main rivals for best tank of World War II tend to be the German Panther tank and the Soviet T-34. Now, on paper, the Panther and the T-34 are both superior to the Sherman. The Panther has a very powerful long 75mm gun that completely outclasses the Sherman in armor penetration from really any realistic combat range. It also has superior armor protection, at least from the frontal arc, and on paper has good mobility and speed with a nice wide track to give it low ground pressure so it doesn't sink into the ground or the mud. However, the Panther was hurriedly put together and designed and hurriedly put into production by the Germans. It also had just kind of very poor optics for searching for enemy tanks to engage. And the thing also tended to break down because of a lot of the flaws inherent in the design when they were putting it together too quickly. Kind of a similar thing for the T-34. The T-34 was very rugged, very well-rounded, well put together, had good armor, had a decent gun that was later upgraded to a much larger, more powerful gun throughout the war. However, the quality control of the T-34 was frankly crap compared to the Sherman. The T-34 was built in massive numbers like the Sherman, but those things did not last. And a lot of times when they were hit, the low quality control, the low quality of the welds holding it together would completely, even though it might not get penetrated by enemy fire, it would crack and almost like break the hull sometimes, so that tank could not be used again in the future. Also, the survivability of something like the T-34 was really low. If you want to see kind of a funny video, go check out the Chieftain's channel, where he does something of, oh bugger, the tank's on fire test, where he tries to get out of a T-34 quickly. And it's kind of humorous if you want to see a tall guy try to squirm out of a pretty cramped space. Now, how does this all relate to financial planning? On the surface, like I said earlier, it doesn't really seem like it does. But let's get into why. You see, the Sherman was built to be good enough to get the job done. It was meant to be able to address most problems it would run into on the battlefield and have a good chance of coming out on top, but it wasn't min-maxed to try to be the absolute best at any one thing. It was simple and reliable, and finally, it was flexible and adaptable. And those features are something that really need to be built into your financial plan. You see, the designers of the M4 knew that the situation on the ground was potentially going to change throughout the war. At the time when the Sherman was produced, the Germans were fielding things like the Panzer III and the Panzer IV, which the Sherman was very able to take care of on its own. But by the end of the war, the Germans were fielding things like the Panther and the Tiger tank, where the Sherman, as it was originally designed and built, had serious trouble in taking care of on its own. So that flexibility and adaptability that was inherent in the Sherman design came into play, where they were able to upgun the Sherman to have a more organic, robust response to be able to have a fighting chance against those German Panthers and Tiger tanks. And your financial plan needs to have the same thing. So let's use taxes as an example. If your financial plan is shoveling all your money into either a pre-tax traditional retirement savings vehicle or a post-tax Roth retirement savings vehicle, you are setting yourself up to expect that there is really no changes to the way taxes are working right now. Your financial plan is set up and very tailor-made to a very specific set of circumstances unfolding between now and whenever you retire. And for many of us out there, that could be 30 or 40 years down the road. When really, in my point of view, the best thing for you to do is to build a retirement savings plan that allows there to be changes in the tax code and the way you are taxed in retirement and the way you're taxed in the future to allow you to adapt to that easily. And that could be something as simple as mixing the types of retirement savings that you're using, both traditional and Roth, to give you flexibility in retirement. It could also be buying certain financial products that could give you more flexibility in retirement as well. Yes, even in the right situation, an annuity or a permanent life insurance product could be something that could provide some flexibility to the right person in the right situation. Also, simplicity. Like I mentioned, the Sherman was a relatively simple design compared to its contemporaries in Germany, for instance. And for your financial plan, it really does pay to have something that's simple and elegant as opposed to overly complicated, which requires a ton of maintenance to take care of over time. Because we all know it gets harder and harder sometimes to take care of something and maintain it properly. It requires discipline and a lot of time and effort. And a lot of people out there really, frankly, don't have that discipline and time and effort to constantly give to their financial plan. So that's why having a simple one that's designed that way, that can also be flexible and adaptable, can really help you in the long run. So what do you think? Do you think we could learn something from the design of the M4 Sherman and kind of apply it to financial planning? Or am I really kind of grasping at straws here? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this, don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe, as I plan on making more of these types of things in the future relating military history, military equipment, and all those types of things to financial planning, and so that you can help better your financial life and maybe learn a thing or two about military history and equipment as well.